It was late November a few years ago, and I was driving home from a prolonged site audit for my company. I live up in the Pacific Northwest, and if you know anything about the weather out there during the winter, you know it can get incredibly brutal. It was already past midnight, and the conditions were just awful. A mix of freezing rain and sleet that made visibility practically zero. I was driving my SUV down a really isolated stretch of the interstate. It's one of those long, winding roads flanked entirely by dense pine forests. There are no streetlights, no houses, just miles of dark trees and the occasional reflective road sign. I was exhausted, basically just running on fumes and whatever caffeine I had left in my system, desperately wanting to get back to my house. That's when my headlights caught something on the narrow shoulder of the road. It was a guy walking by himself in the pitch black, getting absolutely pelted by the freezing rain. Now, I'm a fairly big guy, and I usually have a strict personal rule about never picking up hitchhikers. You just hear too many crazy stories. But the temperature was dipping well below freezing, and this guy was miles away from the nearest town. He was wearing this thin, saturated canvas jacket that was doing nothing to protect him. I honestly thought if I left him out there, he might actually freeze to death. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled the SUV over onto the shoulder. I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in. He looked to be in his late 30s, completely soaked, with water just dripping from his hair onto the floor mats. I asked him where he was headed, and he didn't even look at me. He just gave this vague point forward down the road and mumbled something about the next county line. He didn't say thank you or anything. Immediately, the vibe in the car shifted. The interior started to smell like wet earth and cold air, and the guy was just completely silent. He wasn't shivering, which I found weird for someone who had just been walking in an ice storm, but I just chalked it up to him being in shock from the cold. About 40 minutes later, my low fuel light came on. We were coming up on a small, automated gas station, the kind that's just a couple of pumps and a tiny convenience kiosk attached to it. I pulled in under the bright canopy lights and put the car in park. I asked the guy if he wanted a hot coffee or something to eat from inside. He didn't speak, just gave a slow shake of his head, staring straight out the windshield. I grabbed my wallet, left the keys in the ignition so the heater would stay on for him, and ran inside the kiosk to pay and grab a water. I was inside for maybe 3 or 4 minutes tops. When I walked back out to my SUV, the passenger door was shut, but the seat was completely empty. I looked around the small, empty parking lot, expecting to see him walking toward the bathroom or something, but there was no sign of him. I figured he must have just decided to walk off, or maybe he hitched a ride with a trucker that had been passing by while I was inside. To be completely honest, I was actually a little relieved. The guy was giving me a seriously weird feeling anyway. I pumped my gas, got back into the driver's seat, and got back on the highway to finish the drive home. I live in a somewhat isolated, detached house at the end of a private road. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I hit the button for the attached garage, parked the SUV inside, and closed the garage door behind me. I was so exhausted that I didn't even bother grabbing my work bags from the back of the car. I just unlocked the door leading from the garage into my kitchen, went inside, and made sure all the deadbolts were locked. I took a melatonin to help me crash and went straight upstairs to my bedroom. I usually sleep like a rock, especially after taking a sleep aid. But a few hours later, I woke up. My room was pitch black, and it felt freezing cold, like someone had opened a window downstairs. My mind was still a bit foggy from the melatonin, but my heart was pounding. I lay there in the dark, trying to figure out what had woken me up. Then, I heard it. It wasn't a loud noise, just the slow, heavy, deliberate creaking of the floorboards out in the second-floor hallway. Someone was walking towards my open bedroom door. I was absolutely paralyzed with fear. I knew that if I moved to turn on the lamp or reached for my phone, whoever was out there would know I was awake. I kept my eyes barely open, just squinting through my eyelashes, and tried to make my breathing sound deep and even, like I was still completely asleep. A shadow moved into the doorway, blocking out the faint ambient light from the hall. The figure stepped into my bedroom and slowly walked over to the foot of my bed. I could see his silhouette perfectly. It was the guy from the highway, the hitchhiker. He just stood there at the edge of the bed, perfectly still, staring down at me in the dark. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me for what felt like an absolute eternity. The psychological terror of knowing a stranger is standing over you while you have to pretend to be asleep is something I can't even begin to describe. After maybe 5 minutes of pure, agonizing silence, he slowly turned around. He walked out of the room, and I listened to the floorboards creak as he went down the stairs. A few moments later, I heard the faint click of my front door opening and shutting. I stayed frozen in bed for another hour before I finally had the courage to jump up and lock my bedroom door. When the sun finally came up, I did a full sweep of the house. Nothing was stolen. No TVs were missing. My laptop was still on the counter. I couldn't understand how he got in until I walked out into the garage and looked at my SUV. I walked to the back of the car and looked through the rear window into the cargo area. The heavy winter blanket I keep in the trunk was tossed to the side. Covering the fabric of the cargo mat were huge, muddy footprints and puddles of melted ice. He never ran away at the gas station. While I was inside paying, he just climbed over the seats into the spacious cargo area of my SUV and hid himself under my winter blankets. I had unknowingly driven him right into my own garage, and when I went inside the house, leaving my work bags in the car, I must have left the door connecting the garage to the kitchen unlocked just long enough for him to slip in behind me. I moved out of that house a few months later, and I have never, ever stopped for a stranger on the road again.
This happened during my sophomore year of college. It was late October, and looking back, I still can't believe how quickly a completely normal night turned into an absolute nightmare. I had gone to a massive bonfire party out in a rural farming area, about 15 miles off campus. I didn't know many people there. I had just tagged along with a guy from one of my classes who offered to drive. I had way too much to drink early in the night, and by the time I realized I was ready to go home, I couldn't find my ride anywhere. I asked around, and someone finally told me he had taken off with a group of girls an hour ago. He completely left me stranded. I reached into my pocket to call an Uber or one of my roommates, but the moment I pulled my phone out, the screen went black. The freezing temperatures outside had completely drained my battery. It was completely dead. I was standing in the middle of a dark field, freezing, with no way to contact anyone. I knew that if I just stood out there in the freezing cold, I was going to end up with hypothermia. So, in my drunken, panicking state, I decided my only real option was to walk toward the main state highway. I figured I could either find an open gas station or flag down a passing cop. I started stumbling down the dark country road. The physical exertion of walking actually started to sober me up a bit, replacing the buzz of the alcohol with this sharp, cold anxiety. After walking for what felt like 45 minutes, I was shivering uncontrollably. That's when I saw headlights approaching from behind. A large gray pickup truck slowed down and matched my walking pace. The driver rolled down the passenger window. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, wearing a flannel shirt. He didn't immediately ask me to get in. Instead, he told me he owned some land nearby and was just driving the perimeter to make sure none of the drunk college kids from the bonfire were trespassing on his property.
He seemed totally normal, almost like a grumpy but concerned neighbor. When I told him I was stranded and my phone was dead, he sighed and offered to give me a ride to the 24-hour gas station up near the county line, so I could use a payphone.
I was so exhausted and freezing that I didn't even hesitate. I ignored my gut feeling, opened the door, and climbed into the warm cabin. Almost immediately, something felt incredibly off. Usually, a farmer or a local guy checking his property has a truck full of tools, fast food wrappers, or just general clutter. But the inside of this truck was completely spotless. I mean, it was surgically clean. It smelled overwhelmingly like bleach and industrial cleaning wipes. There wasn't a single personal item in sight. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I was staring out the window, just waiting to see the familiar lights of the highway. But when we reached the intersection where he should have turned left toward the gas station, he just kept driving straight. I asked him where we were going. He mumbled something in a really calm, quiet voice about a road closure and said he knew a shortcut. He suddenly took a sharp turn off the paved road and onto a completely unlit dirt logging road that led deep into a dense forest. My stomach completely dropped. Then the questions started. He wasn't making small talk anymore. He stared straight ahead at the dark road and asked, "Does anyone know you're out here right now?" I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I lied and told him my roommates were tracking my location on my phone, hoping he wouldn't notice my phone was dead in my pocket. He just let out this soft, terrifying little chuckle. That's when I heard the loud click of the doors. He had hit the master lock switch. Before I could even process what was happening, he took his right hand off the steering wheel and clamped it down on my upper thigh. It wasn't a casual touch. He was gripping my leg incredibly hard, digging his fingers in, trying to hold me in place. I wanted to scream, but some primal survival instinct kicked in. I knew that if I fought him right then, locked inside a moving truck with a man twice my size, I would lose. I had to get out, but I had to be smart about it. The logging road was incredibly rough, filled with steep hills and sharp curves. I stopped moving completely, pretending to just be frozen in absolute fear. I slowly, subtly leaned my weight against the passenger door, resting my hand just inches from the manual lock lever. I kept my eyes glued to the dirt road ahead, illuminated by the headlights. A few hundred yards up, the road cut into a sharp, steep hairpin turn. I knew he couldn't take it at full speed. As we approached the curve, he had to slam on the brakes, slowing the heavy truck down to a crawl to make the turn. The second the truck slowed down, I didn't hesitate. I flipped the manual lock, shoved the heavy door open, and threw my entire body out into the darkness. I hit the abrasive gravel shoulder incredibly hard, tearing up my arms and my ribs, but the adrenaline completely numbed the pain. I didn't stay on the road for even a second. I instantly scrambled down the steep, wooded embankment and threw myself into the thick, freezing brush. I heard the truck screech to a halt up on the dirt road. I laid flat against the damp earth, pressing both hands over my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, trying to quiet my heavy breathing. I looked up and saw the red glow of his taillights illuminating the trees. He sat there in the truck for what felt like an eternity, just looking out into the pitch-black woods. I was terrified he was going to grab a flashlight and come down after me. But eventually, he must have realized that chasing a terrified kid into the pitch-black woods was too risky. I heard the engine rev loudly, and he sped off down the logging road, leaving me in the dark. I stayed hidden in those freezing woods for the rest of the night. I didn't dare come out until the sun finally came up, and I could safely find my way back to a main road to get help. Looking back, the scariest part wasn't the jump. It was how easily I got into that truck, just because the guy acted like a polite local. I learned the hard way that you should never let the fear of being rude override your gut feeling when your life is on the line. The bass from the main stage was so loud it was physically vibrating through the soles of my boots and rattling in my chest. It was my junior year of college, and a massive multi-day electronic music festival had taken over a sprawling, isolated expanse of farmland about 30 miles away from our campus. The sheer scale of the event was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of people were crammed into poorly lit fields surrounded by miles of dense, dark woods. Everything went wrong right around midnight. I was standing near the middle of the massive crowd with my 3 friends when a violent fight broke out just a few yards ahead of us. The panic was instantaneous. The crowd surged backward in a terrifying wave of crushing bodies. I was violently shoved from the side, losing my footing and tumbling hard into the dirt. In the sheer chaos of scrambling back to my feet to avoid being trampled, the thin leather strap of my crossbody bag snapped. By the time I was upright, the crowd had pushed me dozens of feet away, and my bag, containing my phone, my ID, and my debit card, was lost forever in the trampling sea of boots. I was completely separated from my friends. I spent the next hour frantically searching the designated meeting spots, but the festival grounds were a confusing maze of flashing strobe lights and identical-looking tents. The temperature was dropping rapidly, hovering just above freezing, and I was wearing nothing but a thin mesh top and a denim skirt. Exhausted, shivering uncontrollably, and bordering on a full-blown panic attack, I decided to walk toward the main entrance to find the rideshare pickup zone. But in my disoriented state, I took a wrong turn past a row of portable restrooms and ended up slipping through a gap in the temporary fencing. Suddenly, the deafening noise of the festival became muffled. I found myself standing on a desolate, unlit gravel access road that stretched out into the pitch-black countryside. There were no lights, no security guards, and no pedestrians. It was just me, the biting cold wind, and a suffocating darkness. I started walking down the gravel path, wrapping my arms tight around my chest, praying it would loop back to the main highway. My teeth were chattering so violently that my jaw ached. After about 20 minutes of walking in pure darkness, a pair of headlights swept over the trees behind me. I turned around and squinted against the blinding glare. A black, late-model sedan was slowly rolling down the gravel road toward me. As it got closer, my heart leaped with absolute relief. Glowing faintly in the bottom corner of the passenger side windshield was a familiar neon purple rideshare decal. It wasn't just some random creep, it was an official driver. I assumed he had taken a wrong turn looking for the festival's VIP pickup lot. I stepped closer to the edge of the road and waved both my arms frantically. The sedan rolled to a stop, the tires crunching loudly against the gravel. The front passenger window glided down. The driver was a man who looked to be in his early 40s. He was wearing a dark, zip-up fleece jacket and had neatly trimmed facial hair. He looked completely normal. "You look freezing," he said, his voice smooth and deeply calm. "You lost?" I quickly explained my nightmare situation. The crowd surge, the lost purse, the dead phone, and being separated from my friends. I begged him to just drive me back to the university campus, promising frantically that my roommates were awake and would run down to pay him whatever amount of cash he wanted the second we arrived. He offered a sympathetic smile, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Don't even worry about the money right now. It's freezing out here. Just get in before you catch your death. It's my last ride of the night anyway." I didn't hesitate. The promise of a heated car overrode every basic survival instinct I had. I pulled open the rear passenger door and slid into the back seat, letting out a heavy sigh as the warm air blasted from the vents and enveloped my freezing skin. He put the car in drive, and we continued down the dark gravel road. For the first 5 minutes, I just leaned my head back, closing my eyes and letting my body thaw. But as my shivering stopped and my head cleared,
My senses became hyper-aware of my environment. The interior of the car was completely spotless. It smelled intensely of harsh chemical air freshener, specifically black ice, but so concentrated it actually burned the back of my throat. I opened my eyes and looked toward the front. That's when the first wave of pure dread washed over me. His dashboard was completely dark. There was no phone mounted to the air vents displaying a GPS route. The glowing Rideshare decal I had seen from the outside was unplugged, the cord just dangling loosely. He wasn't navigating. He was just driving blindly into the darkness. "So," he said, his eyes flicking up to look at me in the rearview mirror. "You're out here completely by yourself. Nobody knows where you are right now." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. "My friends are waiting for me at the campus. I borrowed a stranger's phone to call them before I found you. They're tracking this car's license plate." It was a desperate, transparent lie, and we both knew it. He didn't respond immediately. He just slowly turned the steering wheel, taking the car off the gravel access road and turning onto a narrow, paved route that ventured even deeper into the dense black woods. We were driving entirely away from the distant glow of the festival lights. "I don't think you called anyone," he whispered. The friendly tone was entirely gone, replaced by something cold, hollow, and terrifying. "I think you're just a careless little girl who wandered too far into the dark." Panic exploded in my chest. I reached down and grabbed the interior handle of my door.
I pulled it. The lever moved, but the door didn't unlatch. It was solid. I pulled it again, harder this time, frantically tugging at it. Nothing. The child safety locks were engaged from the outside. I was trapped inside a metal cage, hurtling through a pitch-black forest. "I wouldn't do that," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. I saw his right hand move off the steering wheel and reach down into the center console, retrieving something heavy and metallic. I couldn't see what it was in the dark, but the implication was clear. My mind started racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. If I screamed, he would just pull over right here in the middle of nowhere. I had to wait for an opportunity. I pressed my back against the door, my eyes frantically scanning the dark interior. My left hand brushed against the armrest, and my fingers grazed the window control switch. I pressed it down slightly. A faint mechanical hum buzzed, and the glass dropped a fraction of an inch. He hadn't locked the windows. I knew exactly what I had to do, but I only had one chance to execute it. If I messed up, I was dead. The car began to slow down. Up ahead, the headlights illuminated a rusty chain-link fence surrounding what looked like an abandoned industrial logging yard. Massive piles of rotting timber and rusted heavy machinery were scattered across the dirt lot. He pulled the car off the pavement, driving past the open gate and into the center of the desolate yard. He shifted the car into park. The engine idled loudly. "Let's get comfortable," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. He began to turn his body around to face the back seat. In that exact split second, I slammed my hand down on the window switch. The glass rapidly lowered. Before it was even halfway down, I shoved my right arm out into the freezing night air, reaching blindly for the exterior door handle. My fingers found the cold metal curve. I yanked it upward. The door unlatched and swung open. I didn't even wait for the car to fully settle. I threw my entire body weight out of the vehicle, hitting the hard, frozen dirt of the logging yard. My knees scraped violently against the rocks, tearing the skin, but I didn't feel a single ounce of pain. Adrenaline had completely taken over. "Hey!" he roared from inside the car, a sound of pure, explosive rage.
I scrambled to my feet and sprinted blindly into the darkness. I didn't run back toward the road. I ran deeper into the maze of the abandoned yard. I dove behind a massive, rusted bulldozer, my chest heaving, gasping for air. I heard his car door slam shut. Heavy boots hit the dirt. "You stupid bitch!" he screamed into the night. His voice echoed off the piles of timber. "There's nowhere to go out here!" I pressed my body flat against the freezing metal tracks of the bulldozer, covering my mouth with both hands so he wouldn't hear me breathing. A blinding beam of light sliced through the darkness. He had a heavy flashlight, and he was sweeping it across the yard. The beam hit the dirt just a few feet away from where I was hiding. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting a pair of hands to grab my hair and drag me backward. I listened to the slow, agonizing crunch of his boots walking past the machinery. He was hunting me. He paced around the yard for what felt like an eternity, shining the light into empty pipes and behind stacks of wood. But the yard was massive, cluttered with endless shadows and blind spots. After about 15 minutes of torturous, silent hide-and-seek, the cold must have started getting to him. I heard him spit on the ground and mutter a string of violent curses. The heavy boots crunched back toward the sedan. The car door slammed, the engine revved, and the tires spun out in the dirt as he sped out of the yard, leaving me alone in the dark. I didn't move. I stayed pressed against that rusted bulldozer for hours, my body shivering so violently I thought my bones would crack. I was paralyzed by the fear that he was just waiting outside the gate for me to emerge. I only moved when the sky finally began to turn a faint purple. I crept out of the yard and walked for 2 miles in the opposite direction until I found a rural gas station where the cashier immediately locked the doors and called the police. I never got my phone or my bag back. The police took my statement, but without a license plate, a clear description of the car model, or a specific location of where he picked me up, the fake rideshare driver vanished into the thousands of people leaving the festival that weekend. To this day, I can't look at a glowing rideshare sign without feeling a chill run down my spine.